Would you date someone if your most recent ex said you had to go out with them? Does your answer change if this said ex has been dead for years? Well, that is exactly what George Butler did. But there is a lot more to know about America's first ever haunting. Welcome to Ladies Fright. I'm your host, Joan. Trigger warning. Mentions of traumatic birth and infant death. Yes, you heard me right. This is considered the first haunting in America, which I'm going to push back on that for a second. This may be the first ever recorded haunting in the new country founded as America. Native Americans have had stories of spirits long before the colonies were created. Now, with that clarification out of the way, let's talk about this ghost. We need to talk about this ghost because this is one of the craziest ghost stories I have ever heard. It left me both shocked and frustrated. Nelly Hopper was born on April 25th, 1776 to Joanna and David Hopper. Sadly, most of her history is overshadowed by what happens to her after death, but we do know she had a sister, Sally Wentworth, and Nelly married Captain George Butler at the age of 21. Captain George Butler was the son of Moses Butler, who had a great hand in settling the town of Sullivan, Maine. It is debated where the story actually took place. You will see some people listed as Sullivan, others will say Chiasport, as well as Franklin. This is probably because of the town boundaries changing over the centuries. Based on the articles I read from and referencing Marcus Labrizzi, an English professor at the University of Maine at Machias, and his studies of the case, I will say it took place in Sullivan. I digress. Captain George Butler married Nelly, and soon after the nuptials, she became pregnant. Unfortunately, upon giving birth, the infant did not survive, and Nelly was barely holding on to life. She was able to speak to her mother one last time before she passed away, the day after giving birth. She and her child were buried at Butler's Point in Franklin, Maine. Originally, the baby's resting place was not right next to Nelly's. I mention this because it becomes relevant to the mystery. After Nelly's passing, Captain George was looking for a new wife. Sure, there were rumors that he may have caused Nelly's death, but nothing was proven. The 29-year-old captain set his eye on 15-year-old Lydia Blaisdell. Both the fathers of Lydia and George were opposed to them getting married on account of how young Lydia was. Even though there were marriages of girls as young as 14 at the time, the average age of marriage in the area was 18 or 19. Their families and greater community thought this was not right. Lydia was the youngest daughter of the Blaisdell family, with the patriarch of the family being Abner Blaisdell. Abner served as a sergeant during the American Revolution. He was a pious man and raised his children to be as God-fearing as himself. At least, that is how it was portrayed to everyone. Sometime in 1799, Lydia fell ill with pestilence, or an infectious disease, possibly contracted when visiting the Boston area. She claimed she heard knocking and a faint voice beckoning her to the basement. Her family assumed that these were hallucinations brought on by the fever. That was until August 9th, 1799, when Abner started to hear knocking sounds coming from the cellar. But he couldn't be sure. Then, on January 2nd, 1800, Abner heard a clear voice coming from the cellar. He went down and began to have a conversation with an unseen entity. He asked how he was speaking to it, and the voice replied, quote, "I am the dead wife of Captain George Butler, born Nelly Hopper," unquote. This was 3 years after Nelly's death, and the Blaisdell family knew Nelly. They knew the whole Hopper family since they only lived 6 miles down the road. They also knew her in-laws, the Butlers, since their family home was just several miles away. Even though Nelly manifested in the Blaisdell residence, she actually wanted to speak to several people from outside the home. At first, she requested an audience with her former father-in-law, Moses Butler. In a snowstorm, Abner and Lydia went to the Butler home, and Moses refused to return with them, which I think is very fair. In January, we got 18 inches of snow here, and if the girl who wants to marry my adult son and her father, who also thinks the relationship is a bad idea, showed up at my doorstep offering the spirit of my deceased daughter-in-law instead of helping to shovel, I'll also say no thank you. The Blaisdells return and Nelly says she's going to have an audience tonight and requests they call her father, David, and her husband, George. So back out into the snowstorm they went, this time with much better luck. Both David and George agreed to join the family in the basement. Her father had a conversation with the ghost and felt this was his late daughter. When George and Lydia were alone in the basement, George asked the spirit who she was. She responded by saying that she was once his wife and asked a question of her own. Do you remember what I told you when I was alive? Confused, George said he wasn't sure what she could mean, and fair, I'm sure they said a lot of things to each other while married. The spirit answered her own question. Quote, do you not remember I told you I did not think I should live long with you? I told you that if you were to leave me, I should never wish to change my condition, but that if I was to leave you, I could not blame you if you did. Unquote. Just to translate, apparently at some point in their marriage, Nelly said to George that she thought she's not going to live long and that if he were to die, she would not marry, but if she died, she wouldn't blame him for getting remarried. Now, this is a believable conversation between a married couple. I know I have told my husband that I would want him to feel love and compassion in the case of my death. However, it does become a little suspicious when this is how you and the person you are interested in marrying are the only two people to hear this. Now, with both her father and former husband confirming it was Nelly Butler, Abner again sent for Moses Butler. This is where the story starts to get really weird. The ghost tells Abner, Moses, and George that George is to marry Lydia. Now, a ghost's wishes alone would not have Abner giving away his daughter so easily. However, the spirit said it was also God's will. And for a pious man like Abner, that was all the convincing he needed. The two fathers discussed it and agreed that Moses' adult child should marry Abner's child. This engagement made the people in town raise their eyebrows. Outside of the age gap, many people found it odd that the spirit of Butler's former wife was the justification for this couple. Rumors began that Lydia was actually being wicked and either made up the spirit or tricked George into marriage or had summoned a demon through witchcraft to possess him into the nuptials. It does deeply bother me that a young girl was blamed for trying to trick a fully grown man into a relationship. It doesn't seem, or at least it was not reported, that anyone believed George could be the one behind, or at least a co-conspirator in the marriage scheme. Lydia tried to break off the engagement and flee to family in South York, Maine, claiming the marriage arranged by the ghost of the former wife to her current fiance was too much for her. However, some believe she was trying to escape the rumor mill for a bit. The spirit heard about this plan and forbade Lydia from leaving, since the marriage was God's will. On May 28th, 1800, the wedding of Lydia Blaisdell to George Butler commenced on Butler's Point. Both families were in attendance, including Nelly Butler. The following day, the spirit asked for the newlyweds to see her. She told George to cherish his new wife, for she would befall the same fate as her. The spirit prophesied that Lydia would bear one child and die soon after. You may be thinking what comes next is I tell you what happened to the couple. And then I'm going to move on to different historical or cultural aspects to help give some context to this story, which I would do if I wasn't only halfway done with the story. Yeah, this story becomes even more of a wild ride, which is why I'm surprised I've never heard of it. Getting back into it, after the marriage, everything was quiet and everyone accepted the newlyweds. Of course they didn't. The rumors just got harsher. Now, they didn't even bat an eye at the age gap. They were more concerned with how the spirit came to be. As mentioned before, a lot of the theories revolved around Lydia being the main, if not the only, suspect of a hoax or summoner of a demonic force. In 1800, it was a little over 100 years ago, and a little under 300 miles away, the Salem witch trials occurred, where some narratives will push that young girls were the sole cause of mass hysteria and the false accusation of their neighbors being witches. A crime punishable by death in 20 cases. Some people believed Lydia had such strong romantic feelings for George that they had manifested into a demonic entity. After hearing nothing from her, Nelly's ghost decided that after 63 days, she would just come back for an encore performance and made it a point to prove that she was a good ghost from God and not an evil ghost from hell. Nelly's spirit once again manifested in the basement of the Blaisdell home in early August of 1800. She requested an audience of skeptics and non-believers, especially those who have been so outspoken about their skepticism. One of these people being her own sister, Sally Wentworth. Sally learned of her sister returning from the grave the very night the ghost appeared. Hannah Blaisdell, Lydia's older sister, came to the Butler's home where Sally also happened to be. I will note right now, I don't know why she was there, and especially during a snowstorm, but she was there. Hannah said that she must go see her sister, and Sally straight up said, "No, I don't believe you, so I'm not going." The next day, several people told her that the ghost was legit. So she did end up going and examined the cellar by a candlelight with George. She was later joined by Lydia and one other person. Then Sally heard a voice which reminded her of her sister's voice. However, this did not turn her into a believer. No. Instead, she believed it was a demon taking her sister's form to trick them. Though the distrust between the sisters seemed to be mutual. When the spirit was asked if Sally was a good Christian, she responded with, quote, "She thinks she is. She thinks she is," unquote. Between August 4th to the 14th, the ghost called for everyone who had voiced doubt to witness her. Almost nightly, gatherings were held in the Blaisdell home and cellar. And the cellar must have been huge, because there are accounts of 20 to 30 people in the basement at a time. The audience would know Nelly was ready to speak when they heard knocking. Those who were close to Nelly in life said the voice resembled Nelly's when she was on her deathbed. To prove if she was really Nelly Butler and not an imposter, demon or otherwise, people would quiz the spirit on things they thought only Nelly would know. Richard Downing asked the spirit if she had ever been to his home. She answered she had been once with her mother when Richard's wife had been sick. The specter often offered information about her former self. She told another doubting neighbor, Paul Simpson, quote, "Do you not remember that soon after I was married, you told me that I was married to George Butler and how happy I should be if I was married to Christ? And I said I was not, but I wished I was. Now I am married to Christ," unquote. The specter recalling these private meetings convinced several neighbors this spirit was legitimate. The actual sightings of Nelly Butler took place in the Blaisdell cellar. Once in the dark cellar, which had no windows or outside light coming in, Nelly would manifest as a bright light. Sometimes she would appear just as a blob of light. Other times she would take on a more human form that appeared to be covered in a shroud. There are several accounts where some claim to have seen the spirit, while others in the group said they could not see her and only could hear her. Often, witnesses were asked to file into the cellar 2 by 2. There are accounts where the line would be split down the middle, and the spirit would walk in between them, close enough to reach out and touch, though no one did, except George Butler, who said his hand went right through her, and he felt nothing. On a contradictory account, there was a time where Abner asked people to step back from the spirit because they were standing too close. She said it was okay and they could stand as close as they would like. Nelly would claim the Blaisdell family was innocent and it was the Lord who allowed her to return to them. She would praise God and recite hallelujahs and prayers. Because, demons can't do that. It's against the demon rule book thing they signed. Nelly was able to convert some and really gained a following. The people's belief in her was on full display the evening of August 13th, where this story truly crescendos. On the evening of August 13th, 48 people were at the Blaisdell home. Some called to come by the specter, others joining out of curiosity. The group had gathered and Nelly's spirit had decided to prove her existence. She was going to appear outside of the home. She would show herself to James Miller, and then the group would travel to a home of another after. She told them they would begin at 1 in the morning. They asked, "What time is it?" Because remember, they're all hanging out in this dark cellar. And she said 12, 12, 12. Then several of the men went up to the main living area of the home. They found it was, in fact, 12 o'clock. Nelly told the group to line up 2 by 2 and sing a hymn, much like a funeral procession. In this town, there were multiple kinds of Christians, so it took them a little bit to agree on what to sing and to make sure the words matched and that they knew the words to the song, which I don't know. I find kind of funny. It reminds me of when kids try to coordinate like a song and dance to do in front of their parents. The group asked the specter what time it was, and she responded, 1, 1, 1. I maybe should have mentioned this before, but the ghost would often respond with the same thing 3 times. Anyway, once again, they ran upstairs to see it was in fact 1. In the early hours of August 14th, the procession began. Lydia was instructed to walk in the back on her own, and Nelly promised to join her. As they marched, some people noticed an illuminated figure in a field. Once the group had passed, the shrouded figure joined with Lydia and walked arm in arm with her until they arrived at their first destination. James Miller was awoken by the sound of singing outside of his home. He described suddenly having his house filled with people and the sound of knocking being heard. Paul Blydesdale, one of the sons of the Blydesdale family, was already at Miller's home, going there earlier claiming he was seeking relief from the paranormal madness happening at his home. Paul and James went down into the cellar, where Paul and the spirit spoke, which James said he did not understand due to being distracted from all the knocking he was hearing. At that point, James had had enough and asked why the ghost was even there. Quote, "I have come to let you know that I can speak in this cellar as well as in the other. Are you convinced?" Unquote. To which James said he was. Now, in James' defense, whether I believed in ghosts or not, if I had been woken up at the butt crack of dawn by what looks to be a funeral procession of 48 people all singing, you can't forget the singing, I too would tell the disembodied voice I believed in it if it would get everyone out of my house and I could go back to sleep. The voice told Miller to instruct the group to file outside his door and she would appear before them. Now, I would assume getting so many people in an orderly fashion would take a little bit of time. So the ghost had a minute to wait. According to James Miller, quote, "We went up and complied with her direction, and I saw a personal shape coming towards us, white as the light," unquote. Lydia went towards the ghost and once again started the procession, with Lydia and the spirit of Nelly in the rear. There was a change of plans, and the group headed back to the Blaisdell house. By the time they got there, the ghost was gone. That was the last interaction the ghost had until 6 years later. Even though Nelly's spirit seemed very focused on the marriage of her former husband and then the clearing of the Blaisdell family's name, she did make one request for herself. Nelly's baby passed before she did and was buried a distance away from her own grave. She asked for her baby to be exhumed and placed next to her. Nelly asked, quote, "so that the child would rise at her right hand at the last day." Unquote. To historians' best guess, the child was moved in fall of 1800 after the haunted 10 days in August. 80 people were present for this event. In March of 1801, 7 months after anyone had heard from Nelly, Lydia gave birth to her child. Both passed away within 24 hours, just as the spirit had predicted. And even with this shocking turn of events, the story's still not over. In April, George Butler made the bizarre decision to take all of Lydia's belongings and put them in a small boat and set them on fire and send them down the river. This same river went by the Blaisdell home, and Abner saw all of his dead daughter's belongings floating on by him. This clearly put some tension between the once in-laws. So much so, the local church had to be broken up when George tried to join the same congregation Abner was already a member of. In 1806, July to be specific, 2 boys claimed to see the ghost in a field. Abraham Cummings had heard the stories of the ghost sightings, but he was away performing ministerial duties at the climax of the paranormal activity. He didn't believe the young men had actually seen the ghost. It had been almost 6 years since the last sighting, so it didn't make sense why she would be back. He went out into the field and saw white rocks, and then he knew he was right. The boys must have been mistaken. According to Abraham's account, he happened to look at the same spot about 3 minutes later to see what he thought was a white rock now floating in the air. It wasn't a rock, it was a light. The light began to take on a human form into the shape of a very small human woman. Cummings couldn't help but think to himself that this ghost was just way too teeny to be the one that everyone has been talking about. Just as the thought crossed his mind, the form began to grow to an adult size. This encounter led him to the decision to start questioning those who were a part of the supernatural craze that gripped this small town in Maine. All said and done, more than 100 people claimed to have witnessed the spirit in some way. Abraham Cummings took on the task of obtaining some of the most compelling ones in order to collect evidence towards this haunting. These accounts do have some very interesting claims. The spirit visiting some in their dreams, announcing the death of family members hundreds of miles away, and predicting, or maybe even condemning, Lydia's death, all mentioned in these first-hand accounts to prove this ghost is real. But I'm not so sure about that. In part 2, I'm going to talk about the testimonies of those who saw Nelly's spirit and examine why we should be cautious to believe them. But what do I know? I'm just some lady talking about some frights. Ooh, a to be continued. Who expected that? I mean, maybe you did if you saw that the title says part 1 in it, but who knows? It's something I've never done before, so this could be fun. Yeah, so this was the story that I was talking about that I was supposed to do back in like February. And I just kept finding more and more and more stuff, and I was like, fine, I'll put it off. I'll record it. I'll record it for March. And then I was like, this is too much. I mean, I say like I'll do it in March. This is when I'm recording it. I'm recording it right now in late February for March. And I was like, there's still too much. And I was getting stressed out. And I thought I'd give myself a little break. So I broke it up into 2 parts. And there is still so much more to talk about. Like getting into the testimonies. And I'm so excited. This is such an interesting ghost story. It's not my favorite still. That still goes to the Greenbrier ghost. But I would say it might be number 2 out of all the things because it's such a mystery. And I'm just having like so much fun with it. And I hope you are too. And we're going to next episode get into like a little bit of like a true crimey aspect of it. Not true crime, but analyzing it like it's true crime. So that's a lot of fun. I'm so excited. And I hope that I see you in the next one. But before we do that, here at Ladies Fright, I like to offer you 10%. 10% of what? I hear you asking. Well, hear me out. If you like, comment, or subscribe, you could get 10% more likely to eat a lobster roll. Or you could be 10% less likely to step in dog poop. Or even, you could be 10% more glowing in a dark cellar. But you won't know that until you do one of the 3. Or, if you do all 3, it becomes 30%, because it does build on itself. That being said, I will see you in part 2. Bye!